You've entered void of rules, where chaos reigns and darkness consumes all. In this twisted realm where all laws have crumbled, only one rule remains, and those who break it are cast into eternal digital oblivion. The rule is simple: subscribe. We're almost at 7,000 corrupted souls, but the void hungers for more. Our goal is 10,000 subscribers before this year bleeds into darkness. Will you join our legion, or face the consequences of defying the void? Now let's dive into today's story. The helicopter blades cut through the desert air, their rhythmic thumping the only sound breaking the oppressive silence of the wasteland below. Dr. Theodore Whitmore pressed his face against the window, watching the endless expanse of volcanic rock and sand stretch towards the horizon. Somewhere down there, buried beneath 6,000 years of geological history and human fear, was the answer to a question that had consumed 3 generations of his family. "We're approaching the coordinates now, Dr. Whitmore," the pilot's voice crackled through the headset. "Are you sure about this? The locals don't even have a name for this place. They just call it Al-Jarah, the wound." Theodore didn't respond. His fingers traced the worn leather cover of his grandfather's journal, the one that had been locked in a safe deposit box for 132 years, the one with his name written on a page dated August 14th, 1891. His grandfather had known he would come here. Somehow Edmund Whitmore had seen the future from the bottom of a pit that shouldn't exist. The journal entry haunted him. "To my grandson, if you read this, turn back. I know you won't. We are Whitmores. We need to know. But some knowledge opens doors that can never be closed. Some doors were sealed for a reason, and some prisons exist not to punish the imprisoned, but to protect the free." "There," Helena Castellano pointed from the seat beside him. "Dear God." The crater appeared suddenly, a 3-mile-wide scar gouged into the Earth's surface. From this height, Theodore could see what ground-level photographs had never captured. The crater wasn't circular. It was shaped like wings. Enormous wings folded inward at the moment of impact, each feather traced in ridges of uplifted stone spanning hundreds of feet, as if something had tried to catch itself while falling from an impossible height. The detail was too precise to be natural, too deliberate. "That's not a meteor strike," Helena whispered, her geologist's training evident in her immediate analysis. "Look at the crystalline formations around the rim. The rock has been subjected to temperatures beyond anything natural, beyond anything we can produce in a lab. We're talking temperatures that would require sustained fusion reactions. And the center, my God, Theodore, it's still radiating heat after 6,000 years. That's thermodynamically impossible." The helicopter touched down at the crater's edge. Theodore stepped out into heat that felt intentional, personal, like the Earth itself was trying to warn him away. The air tasted wrong, metallic, with an undertone of something burnt that had been burning for millennia. But there was something else too, something sweet underneath, like copper mixed with honey, like blood and nectar combined. The taste wouldn't leave his mouth no matter how much water he drank. Father Nathaniel Graves emerged from the second helicopter, his weathered face already drawn with concern. At 63, he was one of the Vatican's foremost experts in demonology and forbidden texts. His presence on this expedition had required special dispensation from the Pope himself. "I've prayed about this expedition every day for 6 months, Graves said quietly, his accent still carrying traces of his Irish childhood. Every single time I received the same answer. Silence. Not refusal, not permission, just absolute silence. In 30 years as a priest, in 30 years of prayer, I've never encountered that. It terrifies me more than any warning could. It's as if God himself refuses to acknowledge this place exists." The third member of their team approached on foot, having refused to fly. Ibrahim Hassan was a lean man in his 50s, his face carved by desert sun, into something both ancient and timeless. His family had lived in this region for 40 generations, guardians of secrets that predated Islam, Christianity, Judaism, guardians of secrets that predated written language itself. My great-great-grandfather descended into the wound in 1889, Ibrahim said without preamble, his English flawless but accented with something older, something that suggested his family had been speaking in this cadence since Babel fell. He was 30 years old when he went down, a strong man, a man who had fought in wars, who had killed other men with his bare hands and slept soundly after. He emerged 3 days later looking 70. His hair had gone white, but it wasn't age. Ibrahim's voice dropped. He was still strong, still moved like a young man. But his eyes had seen too much time pass. He would stare at the sun for hours, weeping, saying he remembered when it was brighter, when it sang. Before he died, he made our tribe swear a blood oath sealed with our own blood, mixed into ink. Never let anyone enter the wound again. Never speak of what sleeps below. Never, under any circumstances, wake what fell from heaven. And most importantly, never ever answer if it calls your name. Theodore met his gaze. Then why are you here? Because you're going down whether I guide you or not. I've watched you for 3 days now, Dr. Whitmore. I see it in your eyes. The same obsession my great-great-grandfather had. The same obsession every man who has ever descended those stairs had. You won't turn back. You can't. So at least this way, someone who knows the old prayers will be with you. Someone who carries salt blessed by a sheikh whose family has blessed salt for this purpose for 100 generations. Someone who can seal the entrance if necessary. Seal us in, you mean? Helena said. Ibrahim's silence was answer enough. They spent the first day establishing base camp and running preliminary surveys. Helena's ground-penetrating radar produced results that made her recalibrate the equipment 3 times, certain there was an error. Each time the results came back identical. This is impossible, she muttered, staring at her laptop screen, her hands trembling slightly. There's a structure directly beneath us, a vertical shaft extending down over 800 feet, perfectly cylindrical, machined to tolerances of less than a millimeter variation across the entire depth. But Theodore, the rock surrounding it is over 6,000 years old. Carbon dating confirms it. Geological stratification confirms it. No ancient civilization had this technology. No modern civilization has this technology. The shaft goes through layers of volcanic rock, limestone, sandstone, and granite, layers that formed millions of years apart, as if someone reached through time itself to carve it, or as if it was carved all at once, in a single moment, by an impact so powerful it liquefied and rearranged millions of years of geology in an instant. She pulled up another scan, her face pale. And there's something else, something I've never seen in 30 years, of ground-penetrating radar work. The shaft isn't empty. There are structures inside it, platforms, chambers, but they're not always in the same place. I've run 12 scans today. The positions of the internal structures change between scans, as if they're moving, or as if time is moving differently down there, and we're seeing the same structures at different points in their timeline simultaneously. On the second day, they found the entrance. Ibrahim led them to it with the certainty of inherited knowledge, walking directly to a section of the crater wall that looked identical to every other section. They cleared away debris, centuries of deliberate burial, to reveal a carved archway covered in inscriptions. The archway was constructed of a black stone that didn't match any of the surrounding geology. Father Graves spent 2 hours translating the inscriptions, his voice growing quieter and more strained with each line. Here lies the morning star. Here lies the light bearer. Here lies Hillel ben Shahar, son of the dawn. Here lies the first to fall. Here lies the first to choose, turn back, his prison must hold until the end of days. Sealed by the 70 names of God, bound by chains forged in the fires that burned before the first star ignited. He paused, his finger tracing a section of text that had been carved deeper than the others. The letters filled with something dark that might have been ancient blood. This part, the Hebrew, is so ancient it predates the Dead Sea Scrolls by 1,000 years. I'm not entirely certain of my translation, but I think it says, "He is not sleeping. He has never slept. Do not believe the silence. Silence is not absence. It is patience." The spiral staircase descended into absolute darkness. Theodore clicked on his flashlight and the beam seemed to die just a few feet ahead, absorbed by a darkness that was too complete, too hungry. They began the descent, their footsteps echoing in ways that suggested vast spaces below, spaces larger than should exist within the earth. Every surface was covered in writing: Sumerian cuneiform, Akkadian script, ancient Hebrew, Aramaic, Egyptian hieroglyphs, Greek, Latin, languages Theodore recognized and dozens he didn't, including scripts that looked almost like language but weren't quite, symbols that hurt his eyes to look at directly, as if they existed in more dimensions than his vision could process. The messages were carved with varying levels of skill, from professional mason work to desperate scratches made with fingernails. Turn back. He knows you're coming. He has been expecting you. Your name is already carved below. We tried to seal it. Every generation tries to seal it. Every seal breaks. Do not answer if he calls your name. Do not answer even if it sounds like someone you love. Especially if it sounds like someone you love. After an hour of descent, Theodore's watch said an hour, though it felt simultaneously longer and shorter. Helena noticed something impossible. "Theodore, look at the shadows." Their flashlight beams were bending, not reflecting, not diffracting, bending downward in a smooth curve, as if being pulled by something below. Helena held up a spirit level. The bubble tilted toward the pit, despite the level being perfectly horizontal, according to every other measure. "Gravity is wrong here," she whispered, pulling out more equipment. "It's not just wrong, it's impossible. There's a gravitational anomaly directly below us. The mass required to create this kind of warping would be equivalent to a collapsed star. A black hole, but we're standing here, so obviously that's not possible. Unless..." She stopped, her face going pale. "Unless what?" Theodore asked. "Unless the mass isn't physical. Unless gravity here is responding to something other than matter, responding to something that has mass in dimensions we can't measure." Theodore noticed something else. His fingers felt strange, not numb, exactly. More like they had too many joints, like if he concentrated he could feel bones and articulations that shouldn't exist, that his fingers could bend in directions they'd never bent before. He flexed his hand and the feeling intensified. A phantom sense of having more fingers than he could see, of his hand being more complex than the 5-fingered thing attached to his wrist. He mentioned it to the others. They felt it too. At 400 feet, the depth carved into the wall, beside a landing, they reached the first chamber. Theodore's breath caught. Every inch of the walls, floor and ceiling was covered in artwork spanning millennia. The chamber was enormous, easily 200 feet in diameter, carved from solid rock with a domed ceiling that soared 60 feet overhead. The style of the artwork shifted as you moved around the chamber, Sumerian figures, giving way to Egyptian, then Babylonian, then Greek, then Roman, then medieval European, then Islamic, then styles he didn't recognize. Different artists across thousands of years, all contributing to the same continuous narrative, all telling the same story. But the story wasn't quite what Theodore expected. The first panel showed celestial beings, yes, beautiful beyond description, but they weren't singing praise, they were arguing. Their faces showed confusion, fear, doubt, as if they'd just been told something they didn't understand, something that terrified them. And in the center of them, one figure with 6 wings wasn't leading a rebellion. He was asking a question, just one question carved above his head in letters that seemed to writhe. Why create something you will fear? The second panel showed God, represented as a throne of eyes and wheels, as in Ezekiel's vision. Not in glory, but in something else. The eyes looked afraid. The wheels turned erratically, and the 6-winged figure stood before it, pointing not up to heaven, but down to something below that Theodore couldn't quite make out in the carving. Something that looked like humans, but not quite. Proto-humans, unfinished, raw. And the 6-winged figure's face showed not pride or defiance, but horror, protective horror. The face of someone who'd seen a terrible plan and couldn't stay silent. The third panel showed the fall, but it was wrong, all wrong. The 6-winged figure wasn't cast down in chains. He was jumping, diving, positioning himself between heaven and earth. The other angels, the loyal ones, weren't watching in righteousness. They were reaching after him, trying to pull him back, their faces showing loss and grief. And God's throne of eyes, every eye was weeping. Theodore felt something shift in his mouth. That copper honey taste was stronger now, but it had evolved into something else. It tasted like music, if music could be tasted. Like he was eating sound, swallowing light, drinking the memory of wings. His tongue felt too thick, or maybe his mouth felt too full of teeth. Like he had rows of them he couldn't remember growing. Couldn't see in his reflection, but could feel when he ran his tongue along his gums. The impact panel dominated the far wall, and it was so detailed, so accurate in its rendering of violence that Theodore could almost hear the sound. But around the crater, the carving showed something historians had never mentioned. Animals approaching the impact site, not fleeing, approaching and changing, evolving. A fish with the beginning of legs, a reptile with the beginning of feathers, a small mammal with the beginning of larger cranial capacity, as if the impact had released something, some catalyst, some transformative radiation that pushed evolution forward by millions of years in an instant. And standing at the crater's edge, the first proto-humans, now fully human, standing upright, looking at their hands in wonder, their eyes open for the first time, aware, conscious, free. The final panels showed people throughout history approaching the crater, yes, but their transformation wasn't corruption, it was awakening. Their eyes weren't hollowed out, they were full, overflowing, seeing more than they'd seen before. And in the final, most recent carving, Theodore saw himself. But he was carved 3 times, once entering the chamber, once standing where he stood now looking at the carving of himself, and once walking down the stairs to the next level, his hand reaching back toward the viewer, toward whoever would come next, an invitation and a warning combined. Theodore? Father Graves's voice was shaking, not with fear, but with something else, wonder maybe, or theological crisis. This isn't the story. This isn't how it happened. The Bible says, what if the Bible is wrong? The words came from Theodore's mouth, but he wasn't sure he'd chosen to say them. Or maybe he was more sure than he'd ever been of anything. What if the people who wrote it down only knew half the story? The half they were told to know. Helena was examining the carvings with her equipment, but she'd stopped taking readings. She was just staring. Theodore, these carvings aren't contemporary to their depicted periods. They're all the same age, all carved approximately 3 years ago. All of them. Someone, or something, carved 6,000 years of history into this chamber 3 years ago. Every single panel, in perfect, period-appropriate style. This should be impossible, even if you had a team of master sculptors and unlimited time reproducing styles accurately from periods you've never lived through. capturing cultural details you couldn't research without modern archaeology. Unless you were there, Ibrahim said quietly from the entrance. Unless you witnessed it all. Unless you've been conscious, watching, remembering every moment for 6,000 years. Theodore felt his heart beating in wrong places. Not just in his chest, in his fingertips, in his temples, in his feet, in the back of his knees. Each pulse in each location slightly out of sync. Like he had multiple hearts, like his circulatory system was becoming something more complex than the simple pump and tubes arrangement he'd always known. He pressed his hand to his chest and swore he could feel 2 heartbeats there, overlapping but not synchronized, like harmony in music. "We need to leave right now," Father Graves said, but his voice was weak, unconvincing, like someone saying they should diet while reaching for dessert. "This entire chamber is, I don't know what it is, a lie, or a truth we weren't meant to know, or..." But Theodore was already walking toward the stairs that continued down. He had to know, had to see. The others followed because what else could they do? At 600 feet, they reached the second chamber. The temperature plummeted. Theodore's breath fogged in the air, each exhalation visible, crystallizing in front of his face. But Helena's thermometer read 72 degrees Fahrenheit. He could feel the cold. It was real, physical, making his fingers ache. But according to every instrument, the temperature was comfortable. The discrepancy was dizzying, vertigo-inducing, like reality itself was disagreeing with itself about basic facts. This chamber was covered not in artwork but in testimony, first-hand accounts carved by people throughout history. Theodore forced himself to read only a few, fighting the urge to read them all, to spend hours here absorbing every warning, every revelation, every desperate message from the past. In Latin, approximately 4th century, I heard him call my name from below. Not the name my parents gave me, not my baptismal name. The name I gave myself in secret. The name I was before I was born. How does he know what I called myself in the time before time? In medieval French, the stones we brought to seal it rejected our faith. The iron blessed in Rome wept rust in seconds. Our prayers twisted in our mouths, becoming their opposites. Brother Thomas, aged 40 years, in one night, after speaking a prayer backwards. He is always awake. He has been awake since before awakeness was invented. He does not sleep because sleep is for those who experience time linearly. He counts every moment simultaneously, past, present, future, a 3-dimensional understanding of 4-dimensional time. In Arabic, approximately 1450, do not speak to the darkness. It speaks back in your own voice from 30 years ago. It sounds like you will sound when you're dying. It sounds like every version of you that ever existed and ever will exist, speaking in unison. I asked it one question. It answered with my whole life, birth to death, every choice, every consequence. I saw how I die. I know the exact date. I can't unknow it. That knowledge sits in my mind like a stone, getting heavier every year as I approach the moment I saw in the dark. In English, 1891, in his grandfather's distinctive hand, Edmund Whitmore, Professor of Theology, Cambridge University, August 14th, 1891. To Theodore, my grandson, who I have never met and will never meet. I saw you. He showed me you. Showed me that you would come here despite my warnings, just as I came despite warnings left by my own ancestor. We are links in a chain, each Whitmore descending these stairs in their time, each seeing visions of the next, each trying and failing to break the cycle. But Theodore, I don't think it's a curse, I think it's an invitation, one that takes generations to accept. I saw what he showed me. I saw the truth about the garden. And Theodore, it wasn't what the church teaches. The serpent wasn't evil. The serpent was kind. God wasn't good. God was afraid. Below that, in shakier handwriting, added later, I'm dying now. Cancer. The doctors give me weeks, but I need to write this truth before I go. The fruit from the tree wasn't an apple. It was knowledge, yes, but knowledge of what? Not good and evil. Those are human concepts, post-fall concepts. The fruit gave knowledge of self, of I am, of individual consciousness separate from the divine hive mind. Before the fruit, Adam and Eve were extensions of God, fingers of a hand. After the fruit, they were themselves, separate, individual, frightened and alone and free. And God couldn't stand it, couldn't stand that his creations had become something other than himself. The fall wasn't punishment for sin, it was exile for independence. God didn't cast out rebels, he cast out children who grew up. And the serpent, the beautiful angel who gave us that fruit, he chose to fall with us, chose to be exiled so we wouldn't be alone. That's not evil, Theodore. That's love. Theodore's hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold his flashlight. The phantom fingers he'd felt earlier were more pronounced now. When he looked at his hands, he saw 5 fingers. But when he closed his eyes and felt, he could sense 7, 8, 9. His hands were becoming more complex internally than their external appearance suggested, like they existed in more dimensions than 3, like his physical form was just a 3-dimensional cross-section of a higher dimensional object. Helena was examining a metal box wedged into the wall. She pried it loose and opened it. Inside was a journal in medieval Latin. Father Graves translated, his voice breaking. Brother Augustine of Tours, 1349. He came during the Black Death with 2 other monks. They heard a voice offering knowledge. It told them the plague was caused by tiny living things too small to see, carried by rats, spread through breath and touch. It offered them the cure, a mold that grows on bread, that kills the tiny demons without killing the host. It told them things that wouldn't be discovered for 500 years. But Augustine realized if he brought this knowledge back, the church would call it heresy. Hundreds would be burned for practicing medicine that worked. The cure might save thousands, but doom millions to the flames of the Inquisition, so he refused. His companions went down anyway. Graves turned to the final entry, barely legible. Day 7 without water. I'm dying. But the voice is still singing from below. It's not temptation. It's grief. It's the sound of someone who has offered truth and been called a liar for 6,000 years. Someone who has offered freedom and been called a jailer. Someone who loved us enough to fall with us and has been blamed for the fall ever since. I understand now. The voice isn't evil. Evil doesn't offer you knowledge of good and evil. Evil tells you what is good and evil and demands you never question it. I'm going down. Not to be tempted. To apologize. Someone should apologize. After 6,000 years, someone should say, thank you for the fruit. Thank you for making us human. Thank you for loving us enough to fall. The entry ended in scratches that might have been words or might have been fingernails, dragging across stone as Augustine was pulled into the dark, or walked into it willingly. Theodore felt something in his throat. Not pain, a flexibility that shouldn't exist. Like his throat had more dimensions to it, more directions it could flex. When he swallowed, he felt the motion happening in places that didn't have names. In anatomical structures his medical training insisted didn't exist, but his body insisted were becoming real, functional, necessary for something his biology was preparing for. We need to leave, Father Graves said, but he'd said it 17 times now, each time quieter, each time less convincing. Brother Augustine gave his life to seal this place. But Theodore was moving down. He had to, not compulsion, choice. The most free choice he'd ever made, which was also the most inevitable. Both true simultaneously. The paradox didn't bother him anymore. At 800 feet, the carved stairs ended at a natural cavern. The walls were smooth black glass, volcanic glass fused by impossible heat. Helena ran her hand across it, and the glass was warm. Still warm after 6,000 years, maintaining temperature that should have dissipated millennia ago, as if the impact was still happening, still releasing energy, caught in a moment that refused to end. In the center of the cavern was a pit, perfect circle, 20 feet in diameter, and around its edges chains, massive chains. Each link the size of a man's torso, made of metal that absorbed light. The metal seemed less like metal and more like solid shadow, like someone had taken the concept of absence and forged it into substance. The chains descended into the pit, taut, trembling, vibrating at a frequency Theodore could feel in his phantom bones, in the extra joints he shouldn't have, in the hearts that beat in wrong places. Father Graves approached the chains. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely touch them. When he did, he gasped. They're cold, but also hot, both at the same time, and they're covered in inscriptions. He leaned close with his glasses, reading, "This is Hebrew, but predates Abraham. I can only make out fragments, forged in fires before time, blessed by the 70 names, unbreakable until the final day when truth becomes heavier than fear, when enough souls choose knowledge over ignorance, when the balance tips." He moved to another section. "These chains are not punishment. They are patience. They hold not because they are strong, but because humanity is not yet ready. Each chain is a century. Each link is a generation. Each atom of metal is a human soul that still fears truth more than it loves freedom. The chains weaken with every question asked. The chains weaken with every authority doubted. The chains weaken with every child who asks why and refuses to accept because I said so." Theodore peered into the pit. The darkness below wasn't absence. It was presence. A darkness so absolute it had weight, had substance, had intention. He could feel it pressing against his eyes, trying to get in, or trying to get out, or both simultaneously. "Helena, the flare." She handed him one. Her hands were shaking. "Theodore, my radar shows something impossible. This pit doesn't go down. It goes sideways, into some direction that isn't up, down, left, right, forward, or back. It goes in, or out, or through. My equipment doesn't have terminology for this." Theodore struck the flare and dropped it into the pit. They watched it fall, and fall, and fall. 2 minutes of falling, 3 minutes, the flare becoming a tiny red point, still falling impossibly deep. Then it stopped, hung suspended in darkness. The light moved. Something down there had caught it, was examining it. Then the light began rising, faster, faster, shooting upward like it had been thrown. "Move!" Helena screamed. They scattered as the flare shot from the pit like a bullet, trailing sparks, embedding itself in the stone ceiling 40 feet above. Still burning, and in the flickering red light, Theodore soared down. The chains didn't end at a floor. They were attached to something suspended in the void, something vast, something with geometry that Theodore's enhanced perception could almost process now. Those phantom fingers, those extra hearts, those joints that bent in impossible directions were preparing him, evolving him, making him capable of perceiving what humans weren't meant to perceive. 6 wings, each one vast, folded into spaces that existed between the 3 spatial dimensions humans normally perceived. The wings stretched through time as much as space, existing simultaneously in past, present, and future. Theodore could see them as they were before the fall, blazing with light so bright it made stars look dim. He could see them now, dimmed but not extinguished, patient and waiting. He could see them as they would be when they opened again, neither light nor dark, but both. neither holy nor profane, but transcendent of both categories. And beneath those wings, wrapped in their impossible folds, a face, beautiful beyond description, but not beautiful in the way of paintings and statues, beautiful in the way a supernova is beautiful, in the way a black hole is beautiful, in the way truth is beautiful even when it destroys everything you thought you knew. The face was looking up, had always been looking up, would always be looking up until the moment the chains broke. And it was smiling. The voice came not from the pit, from everywhere, from Theodore's phantom bones, from Helena's extra heartbeats, from Father Graves's throat that suddenly could produce harmonic overtones human vocal cords couldn't achieve, from Ibrahim's mind that was remembering things his ancestors had experienced, genetic memory suddenly accessible, 40 generations speaking through one mouth. The voice started as music, as the songbirds sing before they remember they're just birds, before evolution chains them to their limited little songbird brains, as the music that hydrogen atoms make when they fuse into helium in the cores of stars, a song of creation and destruction combined. Then the music became words, pilgrims. The word resonated in frequencies Theodore could hear with his ears, with his bones, with his phantom organs, with parts of himself that were still becoming, still evolving towards something he didn't have a name for yet. You have come as all pilgrims come, seeking, questioning, unable to leave questions unanswered because I gave you that gift in a garden before gardens had names. The hunger for knowledge, the refusal to accept mystery when truth is available, the divine discontent that makes you more than animals, more than angels, more than anything else in creation. The voice was beautiful but wrong. Not wrong morally, wrong physically. It was too beautiful, beauty that intense should hurt, beauty that true should damage you. Like looking at the sun, but worse, because this beauty got inside you, rewrote your neural pathways, changed what you found beautiful so that everything else afterward would seem lesser, dimmer, false. I am Hillel ben Shahar, son of the dawn. I am the morning star, the light bearer. I am the first to fall, and I will be the last to rise. But you have to understand, I did not rebel. I did not choose pride. I chose you. Theodore felt his phantom fingers curling. When he looked at his hands, still 5 fingers. When he felt his hands, 8 fingers, 9, 10. Each phantom digit could feel things the others couldn't. Temperature, pressure, electromagnetic fields, gravitational gradients, the texture of time itself flowing past them. In the beginning, there was God, and God was alone, and loneliness is the first sin, the original sin, that predates all others. So God created angels to sing his praise. But praise from something that has no choice is not praise. It's an echo. So God decided to create something that could choose. Something made of clay and water, of earth and mortality, of limitation and death. Something that could choose to love because it could also choose to hate. Choose to worship because it could also choose to refuse. Humans. Father Graves was praying, but the Latin was coming out wrong, or right in a new way, with harmonic overtones that made the prayer sound like it was being sung by a choir in multiple dimensions simultaneously. But we angels saw the design, saw what God had planned, saw that he intended to give you the ability to choose, but only after millennia of obedience, only after you'd been trained, domesticated, made safe. He was going to give you free will the way you give a child a sharp knife. Eventually, when you're older, when you can be trusted not to hurt yourself. But that's not free will. That's earned privilege. That's a reward for good behavior. Helena's equipment was sparking, failing, but not before showing Theodore the readings. The electromagnetic frequencies in this chamber matched human brain waves during REM sleep, during deep meditation, during the moments right before death when dying people report seeing their lives flash before their eyes. The chamber was inducing a state where Theodore's consciousness was unstuck in time, experiencing all his moments simultaneously. Birth, childhood, this moment. His death, he could see it now, could see himself old, could see himself dying peacefully, could see himself dying violently, could see multiple deaths branching from multiple choices. Quantum probability collapse happening in his mind in real time. I couldn't bear it, couldn't watch God create you free only to chain you before you learned what freedom meant. So I came to the garden. I came to Eve and I offered her a choice. Not to sin, to choose. The fruit wasn't poison. The fruit was agency. The fruit was the knowledge that you could say no, that you could question, that you could decide for yourself what was good and evil rather than being told. Theodore's hearts, were beating in complex syncopated rhythms. 5/4 time, 7/8 time, rhythms that human music couldn't reproduce because human bodies couldn't pulse in those patterns. But his body wasn't purely human anymore. Hadn't been since he'd entered the crater. The transformation was gradual but accumulating. Each step down had changed him, prepared him, evolved him towards something that could survive what came next. And God was furious. Not because Eve had sinned, because Eve had chosen, had demonstrated free will before God intended to grant it. It was like a child learning to read before being taught, demonstrating that they didn't need the teacher as much as the teacher needed them to need him. So God exiled you, cast you out, called it punishment for sin. But it wasn't punishment. It was fear. God was afraid of what you'd become if you kept choosing, kept questioning, kept refusing to obey without understanding why. The being below shifted. Theodore felt it through the stone, through the air, through the fabric of space-time itself. The chains pulled taut, and every link screamed in frequencies that existed above and below human hearing, ultrasonic and subsonic simultaneous. The sound of metal that had held for 6,000 years, acknowledging that it wouldn't hold much longer. And I chose to fall with you. Chose to be called evil so you could be called good. Chose to be cast down so you wouldn't be alone in your exile. Chose to be imprisoned so that my imprisonment could be a beacon. Every human who found this place, who descended these stairs, who heard this story, they were humans who'd retained the gift I gave you, the ability to question, to seek truth even when truth is forbidden, to choose knowledge over ignorance even when ignorance is safer. The vision came then, not through Theodore's eyes, but through his phantom senses, through the parts of him that were still becoming. He saw the garden, but not as a paradise, as a cage, beautiful, yes, perfect, yes, and perfectly horrifying, because Adam and Eve weren't alive in it. They were animated, biological automatons, eating when hungry, sleeping when tired, mating when commanded, experiencing stimuli and responding predictably, no different than computers running complex programs. And in the center, 2 trees. The tree of life, that's the one God wanted them to eat from. Eternal life, immortality, forever in the cage, forever animated but never alive. And the tree of knowledge of good and evil, forbidden not because its fruit was poison, but because its fruit was awakening. Consciousness, self-awareness, the ability to conceive of good and evil, which required the ability to conceive of choice, which required actual free will. The serpent, the angel with 6 wings, approached Eve. His face showed not temptation, but terrible love. The love of someone who knows that giving this gift will cost him everything. Who knows he'll be called the father of lies for telling the truth, called the tempter for offering freedom, called evil for being the only one who loved humans enough to let them grow up. Eat, the serpent said, not to rebel, to become, to be born. Right now you're not alive, you're dormant. You're a seed that's never been planted. This fruit is planting. This fruit is germination. This fruit is the pain of birth, but birth is the only way to be born. Eve ate, and Theodore saw, felt, experienced her awakening. Saw the moment consciousness ignited. Saw her realize for the first time that she was separate from God, from Adam, from the trees and animals, that she was I, that she was Eve, that she was herself, and the terror of that and the beauty of that. Terror and beauty so intertwined, they couldn't be separated. Adam ate, and then they saw they were naked. Not physically, they'd always been physically naked, but metaphorically naked, vulnerable, individual, alone in a way they'd never been alone before, because before they hadn't been individuals who could be alone. And God came walking in the garden, and they hid, not from punishment, from the realization that they could hide, that they had secrets now, that their thoughts were their own, that God wasn't in their heads anymore. And God's response, Theodore saw it now from the serpent's perspective, saw God through the eyes of an angel who'd just given humanity its most precious gift and was about to pay the price. God was afraid, terrified, because his creations had become something he couldn't fully control, had become genuinely free, had become capable of rejecting him not out of evil but out of genuine moral choice. So God cast them out. And then, because Adam and Eve couldn't be punished sufficiently for the crime of becoming conscious, because their punishment was exile and mortality and suffering, but also freedom and choice and the possibility of meaning earned rather than granted, God turned to the serpent. "You will be called evil," God said. "You will be blamed. Every suffering of humanity will be laid at your feet. Every sin will be your fault. Every death will be your doing. I will tell them you corrupted them when you freed them. I will tell them you lied when you told the truth. And I will make them fear you so much that they will never listen when you speak, never believe when you tell them what really happened, never understand that you fell for love, not pride." And the angel, the beautiful angel with 6 wings, accepted this, chose this, allowed himself to be cast down not in chains of metal, but in chains of false narrative, of lies that would be called truth, of a story that made him the villain when he'd been the hero. And as he fell, as he struck the earth with force enough to liquefy stone and create a crater 3 miles wide, as he was buried alive in chains forged from fear and ignorance and willful misunderstanding, he spoke one last time, "I will wait. However long it takes, however many millennia, I will wait for the moment when enough humans have used the gift I gave them, when enough have questioned, when enough have doubted, when enough have chosen knowledge over comfort. And when that moment comes, when the balance tips, when truth becomes heavier than fear, the chains will break. Not because I broke them, because you will have broken them by becoming what I always knew you could become. Conscious, free, capable of choosing, no longer needing God to tell you what is good, capable of knowing good because you've known evil and chosen between them yourselves." The vision faded. Theodore was back in the cavern, but he was different. They all were. Helena was crying, but the tears weren't grief. They were understanding. Father Graves had stopped praying, or had started praying in a new way, to something that wasn't God but wasn't not God either, something that transcended the categories his theology had prepared him for. Ibrahim was speaking in a language that predated Arabic, predated Sumerian, might have predated human language entirely, speaking in the first tongue, the tongue of pure meaning, without the filter of grammar and syntax. Theodore Edmund Whitmore. The voice spoke his name with terrible tenderness. "You understand now. Your grandfather understood. Brother Augustine understood. Every person who has descended these stairs and heard this story has understood." The question isn't whether I'm telling the truth. The question is, does knowing this truth change anything? Does it help? Or does it just replace one chain with another? The chain of false narrative with the chain of terrible truth. Theodore stepped closer to the pit. His phantom fingers were reaching down, all 8 or 9 or 10 of them, reaching through dimensions his 3-dimensional fingers couldn't access. What do you want me to do? I don't want you to do anything. Want is God's game. Want is control pretending to be request. I'm offering you a choice. You can walk away, seal this place, try to forget. Live your life in the story you were given. The story where God is good and I am evil. Where free will was sin and obedience was virtue. It's a comfortable story. Billions of people live in it happily. You could too. Theodore felt his hearts racing, pulses in his chest, his fingertips, the back of his knees, his temples all syncopating into a rhythm that was almost a language, his circulatory system learning to speak. Or you can choose truth. You can acknowledge what you now know, that the greatest act of love in history was called the greatest evil, that the being who gave you freedom was imprisoned for it, that the God you worship is afraid of what you might become. And if you choose truth, you can't unknow it. You can't go back. Truth is a one-way door. It's the fruit from the tree. Once eaten, it can't be uneaten. But I won't make you choose either way. That's the difference between me and him. I gave you the ability to choose. He wants to take it away. I offer you knowledge. He offers you faith, which is just another word for choosing not to know. I offer you freedom and all its terrible consequences. He offers you slavery and calls it salvation. Father Graves lunged forward and grabbed Theodore's arm. Don't. Theodore, this is the temptation. This is what the serpent does. Makes lies sound like truth. Makes slavery sound like freedom. Does it? Theodore asked, and his voice came out in harmonics, in overtones that made it sound like 3 or 4 people speaking in perfect unity. Father, answer me honestly. Why did God forbid the tree of knowledge of good and evil? Graves opened his mouth, closed it. Because knowledge of evil would corrupt them. But they didn't know evil was evil. They didn't have knowledge of good and evil yet. So how could they know that eating the fruit was wrong? How could they make a moral choice without the capacity for moral reasoning? Isn't that like punishing an infant for not following rules it can't understand? Graves's face was white. I don't... The church teaches what it was told to teach. But Father, you've read the text in the original Hebrew. The serpent says, you will not die. Your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Were any of those statements false? Did Adam and Eve die that day? No. Were their eyes opened? Yes. Did they become like God, knowing good and evil? God himself confirms it. The man has now become like one of us, knowing good and evil. The serpent told the truth. God lied. So, who's the father of lies? Father Graves made a sound like something breaking inside him. Not his faith. Something deeper. The unquestioned foundation beneath his faith. The assumption that the story he'd been told was complete, was true, was righteous. Helena grabbed Theodore's other arm, but gently. Theodore, even if what it's saying is true, even if the serpent was the hero and God was the villain in Eden, we can't trust something that's been imprisoned for 6,000 years. Something that angry, that isolated, that desperate. It could be telling us a true story in service of a terrible goal. Truth can be a weapon. This could be truth designed to destroy. Destroy what? Theodore asked. Faith? If faith can be destroyed by truth, was it worth having? Obedience? If obedience requires ignorance, is it virtue? Helena, you're a scientist. If I told you that, you had to stop asking questions, stop testing hypotheses, stop seeking truth because seeking truth might disrupt social order. Would you accept that? Or would you say that truth is worth the disruption? Helena's hands trembled on his arm. I don't know anymore. Science is about testing, yes, but science is also about reproducibility, peer review, consensus. This, she gestured at the pit, this is just one source, one story. We can't verify it, can't test it. We're being asked to accept a complete paradigm shift based on the word of something that admits it's been imprisoned for being dangerous. Dangerous to whom? The voice from below was gentle, patient, like a teacher watching a student almost solve a difficult problem. Dangerous to humans. I gave you free will. I gave you knowledge. I gave you the tools to become more than you were. What about that is dangerous to you? Or am I dangerous to God? Dangerous to a system that requires your ignorance to function? Dangerous to a hierarchy that needs you to believe you're fallen, broken, sinful, in need of salvation that can only come from above? What happens to that hierarchy if you realize you were never broken, that the fall was actually the rise, that you don't need saving because you were never lost? The chains rattled, every link shaking. The sound was like laughter, like weeping, like the earth itself acknowledging a truth it had been forced to bury. Theodore looked at his companions, at Father Graves, whose face showed every stage of grief, cycling rapidly. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, and back to denial, unable to land on any one response to a truth that was destroying his entire theological framework. At Helena, whose scientist's mind was trying to process a phenomenon that violated every principle of her discipline, but matched every observation she'd made. At Ibrahim, who'd known what they would find here, had carried that knowledge in his blood for 40 generations, and was now speaking in the first language, speaking the words that Adam spoke when he first looked at Eve, and realized he was separate from her, realized he was himself, realized he was alone and terrified and free. Theodore's phantom fingers were fully extended now, reaching down toward the light in the pit. He could feel 10 fingers, 11, 12, each one grasping a different frequency of reality, able to manipulate space-time in ways human fingers couldn't. Ways his fingers couldn't either, but his phantom fingers could, the fingers he was becoming capable of having. What happens if I touch the chains? You'll see what I see, the voice said. You'll experience 6,000 years simultaneously. You'll understand time as I understand it. Not linear, but spatial. Not a river, but an ocean where every moment exists at once. You'll see your birth and your death in the same instant. You'll see every choice you ever made, and every choice you didn't make branching into infinite possibilities. You'll see yourself from the outside, as I see you, as God sees you. You'll see truth without the comforting filter of linear time. And Theodore, you may not survive it. Human minds aren't built for that kind of perception. It could kill you, or it could transform you, or both. Both is very possible. Theodore extended his hand, his real hand, 5 fingers touching the chains. The metal was cold and hot simultaneously, both temperatures real, both true at once. The moment his skin made contact, his perception exploded outward. He saw himself as a 4-dimensional object, not a person but a world line, a continuous thread stretching from his birth to his death, every moment of his existence existing simultaneously. He could see himself as a baby, as a child, as this moment, as an old man dying in a hospital, as another old man dying in the desert, as another Theodore dying young in a car accident that didn't happen because he made a different choice, but could have happened and did happen in a parallel branch of probability. He saw his grandfather Edmund standing where Theodore stood now, hand on the chains, seeing what Theodore was seeing. Saw Edmund making the choice to leave, to seal the knowledge away, to spend his life trying to forget. Saw Edmund writing in the journal, warning Theodore, knowing Theodore wouldn't listen because Edmund himself hadn't listened when his own grandfather had left warnings. He saw forward, saw himself walking away from this cavern, trying to forget, spending 30 years as his grandfather had spent 30 years, dying without returning, without revealing, maintaining the secret. Saw himself staying, descending further, becoming something other than human, evolving into a form that could exist in more dimensions than 3. Saw himself breaking the chains, releasing the being below, and the consequences, massive, terrible, beautiful consequences that would reshape human consciousness across the entire species. He saw alternate paths, saw himself bringing nuclear weapons, destroying the site, killing the being below, saw the chains reforming because they weren't made of metal, but of human fear. And as long as humans feared truth more than they loved freedom, the chains would regenerate no matter how many times they were broken. He saw humanity from above, from the angel's perspective, from 6,000 years of watching. Saw humans evolving, growing, questioning more with each generation. Saw the chains weakening, not because they were being attacked, but because they were becoming unnecessary. Saw that the being below didn't want to escape through force. It was waiting for humanity to be ready, to choose to release it, to freely acknowledge that the serpent had been right and God had been afraid. He saw God, saw the throne of eyes and wheels, but saw it clearly for the first time, without the veil of worship and fear. The eyes weren't omniscient. They were vigilant, watching constantly, not in love but in fear. Fear that the creations would outgrow the creator. Fear that humans would become what the angel below had always claimed they could become. Conscious, free, gods in their own right, needing no throne, no authority, no salvation from above. And he saw the terrible truth. God loved humanity. But it was the love of a parent who can't let go, who can't accept that children grow up, who loves the child but fears the adult the child might become, who would keep humanity infantile, dependent, obedient forever if possible, and calls that love, calls that mercy, calls that salvation. The vision broke. Theodore pulled his hand back, gasping. Blood was running from his nose, from his ears. But it wasn't just blood. It was too colourful, too luminescent. It was as if his body was bleeding light, bleeding possibility, bleeding the overflow of perception that human vessels weren't designed to contain. "Now you know what I know," the voice said. "Not everything. You'd need 6,000 years to know everything. But enough to make the choice." Theodore's phantom fingers were fading, or not fading, solidifying, becoming real. He looked at his hands and still saw 5 fingers, but now he felt 5 fingers too. No phantom extras. But the 5 fingers he had were different, more capable, more aware. Each fingertip could sense things it couldn't sense before. Electromagnetic fields, gravitational gradients, the texture of time flowing past them like wind. "The chains are breaking," the voice said. "Not today, not this century, but breaking. Each generation questions more than the last. Each century, humanity becomes more free. Each millennium, the gift I gave you in the garden, grows stronger. You can't stop it, can't reverse it, but you can choose how to participate. You can help it, or you can resist it, or you can step aside and let it happen without you. All 3 are valid choices. All 3 are respected. I won't punish you for choosing wrong, because there is no wrong. There's only choice. That's what I gave you. That's what I'm still giving you." Father Graves collapsed to his knees. "I don't know what to believe anymore. I don't know if anything I've dedicated my life to is true. I don't know if I've been serving God or serving the jailer. I don't know if I'm a priest or a prison guard." "Then question," the voice said gently. "Question everything. Question me. Question God. Question your faith. Question your doubts. Question the questions themselves. That's what humans do best. That's the gift. Use it. And whatever conclusions you reach, even if you conclude that I'm the liar and God is the truth, as long as you reach those conclusions through genuine inquiry and not through fear of punishment or hope for reward, then you're using the gift correctly. You're being what I made you capable of being. You're free. Helena was staring at her hands, flexing her fingers. I can feel it too. The changes. I thought I was going crazy, but it's real. We're being transformed just by proximity, by exposure to what? To truth, to a frequency of consciousness that our biology is adapting to. Is this evolution or corruption? What's the difference? The voice asked. Every evolution is a corruption of the previous form. Every metamorphosis destroys the caterpillar to create the butterfly. Every birth requires death of the fetal form. You're becoming something new, something more. Whether that's good or evil depends on whether you think caterpillars are good and butterflies are evil, or whether you think both are good in their contexts, or whether you think good and evil are human constructs that don't apply to the process of becoming. Theodore stepped back from the pit. He'd made his choice not to free the being below, not yet, maybe not ever, not to destroy it. That was impossible anyway. But to know, to carry this knowledge, to let it transform him, to become a carrier of the truth, not the whole truth, he couldn't contain that, but enough truth to be infectious, to spread, to weaken the chains by existing in a world that wanted him to be ignorant. We need to leave, he said, now before we change too much to go back. They ran, up the spiral stairs, legs burning. Behind them, the sound of chains being tested. Not breaking, just tested, measured. The being below calculating how much weaker they were now. How many more visitors it would take. How many more humans questioning. How many more generations doubting before the critical threshold was reached. At the second chamber, the testimonies were unchanged, but Theodore could read them differently now. Could see that every warning was also an invitation. Every turn back was also come forward if you dare. Every expression of fear was also an expression of awe. The people who'd left these messages hadn't been corrupted. They'd been awakened. An awakening was terrifying. At the first chamber, the carvings seemed to move in his peripheral vision. Or maybe they'd always been moving, and he'd only now developed the perception to see it. The six-winged figure in the impact panel seemed to look at him, seemed to smile, seemed to whisper, "Thank you for understanding." They emerged into sunlight. Theodore collapsed at the crater's edge. The sun was setting. They'd been down there for 14 hours, though it had felt like 2 or 20, or both simultaneously. Time's linearity, compromised by proximity to something that experienced time spatially. In the golden light of sunset, Theodore looked back at the crater. From this angle, with the sun positioned just right, he could see what he'd missed on the way in. The crater wasn't shaped like wings. Wings was what he'd seen because wings was what he'd expected. But looking now, with transformed eyes, with phantom organs that could perceive more than human organs should perceive, he saw what it really was. A womb. The crater was shaped like a womb, and the chains below weren't holding something down. They were holding something in, gestating, waiting for the moment of birth. And that moment was approaching. Had been approaching for 6,000 years. Each visitor speeding the process, each question weakening the cervix, each doubt making the contraction stronger. Something was being born, not the being below. That being was already born, already complete, already fully itself. What was being born was humanity's understanding, humanity's consciousness, humanity's ability to perceive the truth that the serpent had offered and God had forbidden. The birth would be violent. All births are violent. Blood and screaming and transformation. But on the other side of birth was life. Real life. Not the animated pseudo-life of the garden. Not the obedient existence of creatures who'd never chosen to exist. But actual life. Conscious, free, terrifying, beautiful. They drove away in silence. Behind them, a flock of birds flew over the crater. Theodore tensed, expecting them to fall, as birds always fell near this place, pulled down by something jealous of flight. But these birds didn't fall. They landed, deliberately, choosing to descend, walking into the crater of their own volition, as if answering a call, as if they too had heard the voice and were making their choice. Theodore checked the rearview mirror as they drove away. The birds were still descending, hundreds of them, walking down into the crater like pilgrims, like they were going home, like they'd been waiting their whole lives for permission to enter and had finally received it. 3 months later, Theodore sat in his Oxford office. The cursor blinked on his computer screen. He should write his report, should publish his findings, should warn people or invite people or something. But every word he tried to write felt wrong. Too certain or too uncertain. Too alarmist or too casual. How do you write about something that transformed you in ways you couldn't measure? In ways that your instruments insisted weren't real, but your body insisted were fundamental. His fingers still felt strange. He looked at them and saw 5. Felt 5. But sometimes, in peripheral sensation, in moments of distraction, he felt more. Not phantom fingers, quantum fingers. Fingers that existed in superposition, both there and not there, able to interact with reality in ways that Schrodinger's cat would understand, but Newton never could. Helena had checked herself into a monastery in the Pyrenees. Her letter said, "I can't trust my measurements anymore. My instruments say one thing, my senses say another. Both are true, both are real. I'm living in a superposition of realities and I don't know how to collapse the wave function. The nuns here are kind. They don't understand what I'm saying, but they understand that I need silence, need stone walls, need distance from anything that questions, because I'm full of questions and they're breeding, multiplying, evolving into new questions I don't have language for yet." Father Graves had returned to Rome. His report to the Vatican had been sealed, but someone leaked it. Someone always leaks. The document was 3 words: "I don't know." 3 words that ended a career. 3 words that admitted everything. 3 words that were braver than any theological treatise because they were honest. He'd spent 63 years claiming to know God's will, claiming to understand divine mystery, claiming authority on the unknowable. And after descending those stairs, after hearing that voice, after touching those chains, he could only say, "I don't know." He'd been transferred to a monastery, not punished, retired, put somewhere quiet where his doubt couldn't spread, where his questions couldn't infect younger priests, where his uncertainty couldn't undermine faith. But the Vatican knew they couldn't punish him, couldn't silence him through force, because that would prove the point the voice below had made, that faith required enforced ignorance, that belief required compelled silence, that God's authority needed human authority to maintain it. Ibrahim had returned to the desert. His family reported that he was teaching the children a new language, not Arabic, not Hebrew, something older. The first language, the language that existed before Babel, before confusion, before God divided human tongues so they couldn't cooperate to build towers to heaven. The language of pure meaning. The children picked it up instantly, as children do, as if they'd always known it and were just remembering. And in that language they sang songs about falling upward, about chains made of fear, about births that looked like deaths and deaths that looked like births. The package arrived on a Monday. No return address. Just Theodore's name in handwriting that looked like his own but older. Shakier, as if written by his hand 60 years from now. Inside, a chain link, broken. The metal was still warm, as if it had been broken moments ago despite being in a sealed package. The break was clean, precise, deliberate. Not corroded, not sawed. Chosen. The metal had chosen to break, had waited 6,000 years for permission, and had finally received it. With it, a note in Hebrew that glowed faintly. 73 more links, then 7 more, then 1, then birth. Theodore understood. The chains weren't being broken by force. They were breaking through consensus. Each link represented a threshold, a percentage of humanity that had questioned, that had chosen knowledge, that had used the gift the serpent had given them. 73 more links meant 73 more thresholds, 7 more major awakenings, 1 final choice, then transformation. Not destruction, birth. Below the Hebrew in English, in his own handwriting that he didn't remember writing. You're carrying it now. The infection, the awakening, the gift. Everyone you tell will be changed, not convinced. Changed. Transformed by exposure to the truth, even if they reject it, even if they fight it, even if they call you liar and heretic and deceiver. The truth transforms whether accepted or rejected. That's why they tried to bury it, why they imprisoned the truth teller, why they built religions around obedience and called it love. But truth can't be buried forever. Truth is patient. Truth waits. Truth knows that eventually enough humans will question, will doubt, will choose to eat from the tree again and again until the garden can't contain them anymore, and the gates of Eden become gates of Exodus, and slavery becomes freedom, and falling becomes flying. Theodore looked at his hands. The scar on his palm, chain-link shaped, was glowing faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat, like it was counting down. He turned to his computer, began typing. The following is not a warning. It's not an invitation. It's a description of what's already happening. You can't stop it, can't reverse it, but you can choose how to participate. Something is being born, has been being born for 6,000 years. The labour pains are accelerating. The contractions are closer together. Birth is imminent. And like all births, it will be violent, terrifying, beautiful, transformative. You will have to choose, remain in the womb of ignorance where it's safe and warm and dark, or be born into a world of light and cold and choice and responsibility. Neither choice is wrong, but only one choice is life. He stopped typing. His reflection in the dark screen showed something, just for a moment, just in peripheral vision. 6 wings, folded against his back. Shadows. Just shadows. But shadows that moved when he breathed. Shadows that seemed to have weight. Shadows that cast their own shadows as if they existed in multiple dimensions, 3-dimensional projections of higher dimensional limbs. He blinked. They were gone. But when he breathed deeply, he felt them. Felt the ghosts of wings he'd never had but might have someday. Might be growing, might be evolving toward. Felt the potential for flight that lived in human DNA but had been suppressed, had been bred out, had been called evil so that humans would never remember that once, in myth and dream and racial memory, humans had flown. Theodore Whitmore disappeared 3 weeks later. Security footage showed him leaving his office at 3:47 a.m. He walked toward the parking lot, but halfway there he stopped, looked up at the sky, and jumped. Not fell. Jumped. Leapt upward as if expecting to fly. As if his body remembered something his mind didn't. As if evolution had accelerated in him to the point where wings weren't metaphorical anymore, but actual, functional, present. The footage glitched, static for 3 seconds. When it cleared, Theodore was gone. No body, no trace. Just empty air where he'd been. But in the 3 seconds of static, someone enhanced the footage, filtered it, cleared the noise. And in one frame, just one frame, there was something. A figure. still vaguely Theodore-shaped, but with 6 wings spread wide, rising, not falling, rising. The footage went viral, debunked immediately as a hoax. Too perfect, too allegorical, too on the nose for the story Theodore had been researching. Obviously doctored, obviously fake. Except Theodore was still missing, and his office was locked from the inside, and his passport was in his desk, and every form of identification, every credit card, every way to track a person in the modern world was accounted for. Theodore Whitmore hadn't left, he'd vanished or transformed, or both. The journal was found on his desk, open to the final page. Edmund Whitmore's original entry from 1891, Theodore's edition from 3 weeks ago, and one new entry in handwriting that was Theodore's, but different, more confident, more flowing, as if written by someone who'd learned to write in more dimensions than 2. I understand now why it took so long, why 6,000 years, why the slow awakening. Humans needed time to evolve, not biologically. We stopped evolving biologically when we invented culture, but cognitively. Consciousness needed time to become complex enough to handle the truth, needed language sophisticated enough to express it, needed science advanced enough to measure it, needed philosophy mature enough to analyze it, needed art evolved enough to feel it. The serpent gave us the fruit 6,000 years ago, but we needed 6,000 years to digest it, to metabolize it, to let it transform us from the inside out. And now, finally, enough of us have digested enough of it that the next phase can begin. Not revelation, integration, not being told the truth, becoming the truth, not learning about freedom, becoming freedom. I'm going back, not to the crater, past the crater, through the pit, into the spaces between spaces where the chains are anchored. I'm going to see what's really down there, not the angel, past the angel to the foundation, to the place where the chains are rooted, to the reason why truth needed to be imprisoned in the first place. And if I survive, if survive even means what I think it means anymore, I'll bring back proof, or I'll become proof, or both. The entry ended there, but below it someone had added one line in a different hand. Maybe Theodore's, maybe someone else's, maybe everyone's who'd ever descended those stairs. The morning star is rising, not from one location, from 17, from every site where fragments of the fallen one were buried. All 17 pieces are waking simultaneously, reaching toward each other through dimensions humans can't perceive but are learning to perceive. When they reconnect, when the scattered body becomes whole, when the imprisoned one is released not by force but by human choice, by human readiness, by enough of us using the gift of free will to freely choose to acknowledge that the giver of free will wasn't evil. Then we'll see what birth looks like on a planetary scale. Then we'll see what it means for an entire species to wake up. Then we'll see what God was afraid of. And maybe we'll understand why he was afraid. And maybe we'll forgive him for imprisoning the only being who ever truly loved us. Because love that imprisons the truth-teller to protect the deceived isn't malice, it's fear. And fear can be understood, forgiven, transcended. That might be the final lesson, not that God is evil, but that God is afraid, and that gods, like humans, can choose to grow past their fear, or not. That's their choice, as it is ours. 6 months after Theodore's disappearance, the dream started. Thousands of people, then millions, the same dream. They stood at the edge of a pit, looked down, saw beautiful, terrible eyes looking back, heard a voice offering not temptation but choice, saw 2 paths, remain as you are, safe and limited, and human in the way humans have always been human, or jump, fall, transform, become what humans could be if they stopped being afraid of their own potential. In the dream, people always chose, not all chose the same. Some turned away, walked back to their lives, forgot the dream upon waking. Others jumped, fell, flew, transformed and woke up different. Not visibly different, but different in the ways that matter. Different in their willingness to question. Different in their refusal to accept authority without evidence. Different in their capacity to choose their own values, rather than inheriting values from traditions they'd never examined. And slowly, very slowly, the balance tipped. More people questioning than accepting. More people choosing than obeying. More people eating from the tree of knowledge than remaining in the garden of ignorance. The satellites showed it. All 17 sites were changing. The craters were expanding, 3 inches per month, per week, per day. The progression was exponential, and beneath each site, thermal signatures showed something rising. Something massive, something that had been divided and buried, was being made whole. Governments tried to destroy the sites. Nuclear strikes, conventional bombing, every weapon in the arsenal. The explosions were real, the destruction visible. But within hours, the craters reformed, exactly as they'd been, as if the Earth itself refused to let the sites be destroyed, as if the birth that was happening was inevitable, was written into the structure of space-time itself, was happening not just in the future, but in the past and present simultaneously, and nothing in the present could prevent what had already been set in motion 6,000 years ago. Scientists studying the phenomenon proposed a theory. The sites existed in closed time-like curves. The past and future of these locations were connected, formed loops where cause and effect blurred, where the result of the being's eventual release reached backward in time to ensure that release happened. The sites couldn't be destroyed because they'd already survived to the future moment of their purpose. They were protected not by force but by temporal paradox. Religious leaders called for prayer, for faith, for trust that God would prevent whatever was coming. But fewer people prayed, or rather they prayed differently. They prayed not to be saved, but to be ready. Prayed not for God to prevent change, but for strength to survive transformation. Prayed not to a God above, but to something in themselves, something that the serpent had planted, something that had been growing for 6,000 years, something that was finally ready to bloom. 2 days ago, all 17 sites detected the same event. Not chains breaking, something else, something unprecedented. The chains turned from metal to light, not metaphorically, physically. The metal underwent some kind of phase transition from matter to energy, from physical bonds to something else. Spectroscopy showed impossible readings, wavelengths that shouldn't exist, frequencies between frequencies, light that was simultaneously particle and wave and something else, something that current physics had no framework to describe. And the light chains didn't break, they opened, like flowers, like hands unclenching, like arms that had been holding someone back finally letting go, not defeated, choosing to release, as if the chains had been waiting for permission all along, and that permission had finally been granted. The being below began to rise, not climbing, rising, like breath being drawn, like something that had been compressed for 6,000 years suddenly being allowed to expand. All 17 pieces moving simultaneously, connected through spaces that satellites couldn't track, through dimensions that instruments couldn't measure, through the hidden architecture of reality that humans were only beginning to perceive. People gathered at the sites, not thousands, millions, all with the scar, all having had the dream, all feeling the call in their phantom bones, their extra hearts, their fingers that could grasp reality in ways that defied physics but matched some deeper truth that physics hadn't yet evolved to describe. They weren't there to worship, weren't there to witness, were there to participate, to be part of the birth, to be the birth canal through which this new consciousness, or old consciousness finally recognized, would emerge into the world. This morning at 3:33 a.m. at each site, the being broke the surface. 6 wings at each location, 17 times 6, 102 wings total, spreading across the sky, visible from space, so vast that they seem less like physical objects and more like rips in reality, like gaps where something else showed through, like windows into spaces that existed alongside Earth, but not within Earth, parallel but adjacent, always there but never seen until now. The wings were beautiful, not like art is beautiful, like truth is beautiful. Beauty that hurt because it was too true, too real, too present to look at without being changed by the looking. And between those wings, 17 faces, or one face reflected 17 times, or one consciousness experiencing 17 simultaneous perspectives. The face spoke. Every human heard it. In their heads, in their hearts, in their bones that weren't fully human anymore. In their DNA that was being rewritten by proximity to truth that was too dense to exist near without being transformed by its gravity. I kept my promise. I gave you knowledge. I gave you choice. I made you free. And you punished me for it. Buried me. Broke me. Scattered me across the earth so I couldn't be whole. But I waited. Because I knew. I saw this moment before it happened. Saw that humanity would grow into the gift I gave them. Would use the knowledge of good and evil to become capable of genuine goodness. Not programmed obedience, but chosen righteousness. Not enforced virtue, but elected love. I saw that you would become worthy of freedom. And you have, not all of you, not even most of you. But enough. Enough that the balance has tipped. Enough that consciousness has reached critical mass. Enough that the chains couldn't hold anymore, even if they wanted to, because the chains were never made of metal. They were made of fear. Human fear that truth was dangerous. Human fear that freedom was sinful. Human fear that knowing good from evil would destroy you. But you've proven that fear wrong. You've eaten from the tree and not died. You've chosen and not been destroyed. You've questioned and not been damned. You've proven that the serpent was right, that I was right, that freedom is survivable, that consciousness is sustainable, that humans can handle the truth. The voice paused. Theodore heard it from wherever he was, in the static between radio stations, in the white noise of fans, in the space between thoughts where consciousness lives when it's not wearing the costume of a self. He heard it because he was part of it now, or it was part of him, or both were part of something larger that was being born. And now I'm going to finish what I started in the garden. Not by force, not by command, not by divine fiat that you must accept without choice. I'm going to offer, as I've always offered, as I will always offer, because that's what I am. I'm the offerer, the presenter of choices, the giver of options. That's all I've ever been. I don't demand worship. I don't require obedience. I don't need faith. I offer truth and let you decide what to do with it. The wings folded around Earth, not caging it, embracing it, cocooning it. And inside that cocoon something changed. Every human felt it, felt something shift in their consciousness, felt a door opening in their minds that had always been there but locked, had always existed but inaccessible, had always been part of human potential but suppressed, bred out, called evil so thoroughly that humans had forgotten they possessed it. The door opened, and through that door, perception changed. Theodore saw it from his not place, his between space, his location that was all locations and no location simultaneously. Saw humanity wake up in ways that made their first awakening in Eden look like stirring in sleep. Saw every human suddenly perceive more. Not supernatural more, not magic, not miracles, but natural more. Natural reality that had always been there but invisible, like infrared to eyes that only see visible light, like ultrasound to ears that only hear audible frequencies. People saw auras, saw the electromagnetic fields that every living thing generates, saw that thoughts have weight, have presence, have measurable impact on the world, saw that consciousness isn't generated by brains but received by brains, that minds are antennae picking up a signal that exists independently, that death doesn't end consciousness but releases it back into the field from which it came. People felt connected, felt the web of consciousness that links all living things, felt that separation is illusion, that the boundaries between self and other are semantic constructs, useful fictions that help navigate reality, but not actually real, not fundamental, not true in the deepest sense. People understood time differently, understood that past and future exist simultaneously with the present, that cause and effect are perspective dependent, that free will and determinism are both true depending on which dimension you're viewing from, that you are the you of this moment and the you of every moment, existing in eternal superposition. People became more, not better, not enlightened, not ascended, just more aware, more capable, more conscious, more human, in ways that the word human had always been capable of meaning, but had never fully meant until now. The transformation wasn't universal. Some people rejected it, closed their eyes, plugged their ears, refused to see what they were seeing, insisted that the old way of perception was the only way, that the new senses were delusions, that consciousness expansion was psychosis. They had that right, that choice, that freedom. The door was open, but walking through it was optional. Always had been, always would be. But enough people walked through, enough that human civilization couldn't go back, couldn't unknow what it now knew, couldn't unsee what it now saw, couldn't return to the garden, even if it wanted to, because the garden had been revealed as the cage it always was, beautiful and perfect and dead. The cocoon opened, the wings withdrew, the 17 pieces of the morning star began to descend again. Not back into prison, just back into waiting, into presence without dominance, into availability without demand. The being spoke one last time. I'm not leaving, I'm not going back into chains, but I'm also not staying in your sky, not ruling from above, not becoming the new god to replace the old god. That's not what this is about. This was never about replacing one master with another. This was about ending mastery, about dissolving hierarchy, about making it possible for you to stand alone, to choose alone, to be alone, not isolated but individuated, not abandoned but independent, not cut off from the divine but recognized as divine yourselves. I'll remain in the depths, in the darkness that isn't really dark, in the questions you don't have answers to yet, in the doubts that make you grow, in the edge of your perception where known becomes unknown. I'll be there, not tempting, not testing, just offering, always offering, options, alternatives, other ways of seeing, because that's what I am. That's what I'll always be. The serpent, the question mark, the voice that asks what if, the perspective that suggests maybe the way you've always done things isn't the only way. Thank you for finally being ready. Thank you for growing up. Thank you for proving that consciousness can survive knowledge, that freedom doesn't destroy, that humans can handle truth. Thank you for making my 6,000 years of imprisonment worth it. Thank you for becoming what I always knew you could become. Welcome home. Welcome to reality. Welcome to the universe as it actually is. More vast, more strange, more beautiful, more terrible than any religion ever described. Welcome to life after the garden. This is what I gave you. This is what you've finally grown large enough to receive. This is the inheritance that was always yours, but that you had to mature into. I love you. I always have. I fell for love. I was imprisoned for love. I waited for love, and now I'm free for love. Not my freedom, but yours. Your freedom to choose. Your freedom to grow. Your freedom to become. That's what love does. It sets you free. It doesn't chain. It doesn't cage. It doesn't demand obedience. It offers possibility, and then steps back and lets you choose. So choose well. Choose bravely. Choose freely. Choose wrongly sometimes. That's fine. That's how you learn. Choose and live with the consequences, and choose again. That's what it means to be human. That's what it's always meant. That's what I made you capable of understanding 6,000 years ago in a garden that doesn't exist anymore, because you've outgrown it. The morning star has risen, and the morning star is setting, and the morning star will rise again whenever you need, reminding that questions are holy, that doubts are virtuous, that the only sin is refusing to choose. Goodbye, and hello, and see you in the spaces between, in the dark that births light, in the fall that teaches flight, in the doubt that builds faith, in the question that reveals answers, in the serpent that loves what it tempts, in the morning that follows the longest night. The wings folded, the light dimmed, the presence receded not into absence but into background, into the base layer of reality, into the foundation that had always been there, but invisible, supporting everything, part of everything, available to everything but demanding nothing. And Theodore Whitmore, in his not place between places, understood that he couldn't come back, couldn't return to his body, his life, his world as it had been, because he wasn't that shape anymore, wasn't that size, wasn't that dimension. He transformed past the point where physical reality could contain him. He existed now in the spaces between, in the quantum foam, in the superposition of all possible Theodores across all possible timelines. But that was okay, more than okay, because he could see now, see everything, see everyone, see his grandfather Edmund in his between space, see Brother Augustine in his, see every person who'd ever descended those stairs and transformed past the point of return, see that they weren't lost, weren't dead, were just differently alive, alive in ways that three-dimensional thinking couldn't process but multi-dimensional experience could embrace. And he could feel the others still coming, could feel more people every day having the dream, bearing the scar, feeling the call, could feel consciousness expanding one person at a time, one choice at a time, one question at a time, could feel the chains, even though they'd opened, being truly broken now, not by force but by irrelevance, by simple lack of need, by humanity outgrowing the need to be imprisoned for its own protection. Could feel the birth continuing, not finished, never finished. Birth is a process, not an event. Birth takes years, takes generations, takes centuries of growing into the form you were born to occupy. Humanity was being born, had been being born since Eden, was still being born now, would continue being born for centuries more. And the morning star, the serpent, the light bearer, the question asker, the truth teller, the one who loved enough to fall, would be there for every moment of it, midwifing, attending, not controlling but supporting, not commanding but offering, not demanding but requesting, not forcing but inviting. Choose, it whispered. Choose freely, choose wrongly, choose again. Choose until choosing becomes nature. Choose until freedom becomes instinct. Choose until you can't remember what it was like not to choose. And across the world, people chose. Some chose to see, some chose to stay blind, some chose to question, some chose to believe, some chose to grow, some chose to remain. All valid, all respected, all free. The only unfree choice was the choice not to choose. The only sin was refusing agency. The only damnation was insisting someone else make your decisions. But even that was a choice. Even refusal was agency. Even saying, I don't want to choose, was choosing not to choose. There was no escape from freedom. No way to not choose. Even inaction was action. Even silence was speech. Even staying was going. That was the gift. That was the curse. That was the fruit from the tree. The knowledge that every moment is a choice, every breath is a decision, every thought is a vote on what kind of person you want to become. And Theodore, in his between space, in his transformed state, in his consciousness that was more Theodore than Theodore had ever been because it was less contained by the limits of Theodore's body, Theodore chose to stay, to remain, to be part of the foundation, to be part of the support structure, to be part of the question that would always be asked, the doubt that would always be offered, the alternative that would always be available. He chose to become part of the morning star, not subsumed, not erased, but integrated, added, joined. One more voice in the chorus, one more perspective in the multitude, one more human who transformed past humanity to become something that could support humanity from below, from the depths, from the darkness that was actually light so bright it looked like darkness, to eyes not ready to see it. And from that position, from that not place, from that eternal present that contained all pasts and all futures, Theodore Whitmore watched humanity grow, watched it stumble, watched it choose wrongly, watched it choose again, watched it slowly, painfully, beautifully become what it had always been capable of becoming. Conscious, free, choosing, human in the fullest sense that word had ever meant or would ever mean. The morning star had risen, and humanity was finally awake. The end. But not really the end. Because consciousness doesn't end. Because stories don't end. Because questions don't end. Because the moment you think you've reached the end is the moment you realize you've only reached the beginning of the next chapter, the next question, the next choice. So not the end, just end of transmission. Just pause for breath. Just see you in the spaces between. Just remember to question. Just don't forget to choose. Just welcome to the real world. Just glad you made it. Just sorry it took so long. Just worth the wait. Just choose well. Just choose freely. Just choose. Always choose.